So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our session. I will turn off the chat in a moment and I'll kind of go through our housekeeping rules a little bit. So as you notice, your speakers and videos already turned off. This is more of like a webinar session. And what I am going to suggest is if you have questions, you use the Q&A box that's available sort of at the bottom of your screen. And if you touch that button, you'll be able to raise questions and we'll be able to kind of keep track of questions a little bit better. So that's going to make it really easy for us as well. And at the same time, we'll go through a little bit of a background of, I'll let Claire kind of introduce herself and a little bit about Comet and Opik and what it is. But yeah, just have fun. We want to make this as conversational as possible. It is interactive. Although there's quite a lot of you joining remotely from everywhere, we do want to make sure that it kind of you learn something from this and you take away something from this as well. So if you feel like you're stuck somewhere or you're not quite sure, again, raise the question as I mentioned, and we'll sort of go from there. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, Claire, I'll get you to introduce yourself and get into it.
Awesome. Thank you, Vincent. Hey, everyone. My name is Claire Longo. I'm going to be leading us through this hands-on session today. And a little bit about my background. I'm currently a developer advocate and AI researcher at Comet. And before that, I used to be a machine learning engineer and data scientist myself. So I've been through kind of all the pain points of like creating AI and machine learning models and bringing them to production. I've learned a lot from that experience, and I'm here to share it with you all today. This is our first in a series of virtual learning series that we're going to be providing to the community here. I'm really excited to do this because we do a lot of live events here at Comet, and I understand that people from all over the world can't always get to our live events. So this is really allowing us to connect with folks from all over the world. I see people from Kenya, from Australia, from California, Pakistan. That's amazing. I'm so glad we were able to bring you all together here. As Vincent was saying, please be interactive, use the Q&A to submit questions. I feel like the best presentations, you guys are going to help me and tell me exactly what you care about so I can make sure I'm giving you guys the right information. So don't hesitate to answer questions and we will answer, or don't hesitate to ask questions and we will answer some of them live. Okay, so let's jump in. So the topic that we're covering today is we're going to be talking about evaluating conversational agents. There's a lot of AI projects these days that are like chatbots, customer service agents, a lot of these kind of like conversational products. And in a conversation, you end up with like this long AI and human back and forth interaction, and evaluating the quality of those conversations is actually really difficult because it's not just a single call to one LLM. It's typically multiple calls and back and forth. And the human can maybe wander off, then come back and finish the conversation with the AI. So there's these interesting nuances that make this actually really challenging, but there's also a lot of use cases being built around this. So this is going to be the focus today. We're going to be covering how to do this in Opik. I have some code that I'm going to share with y'all so you can see and maybe build something like this on your own or something similar. But I'll be going through a few slides, kind of just setting the stage, telling you guys what Opik is, how you can get started with it, and covering like the core features. And we'll jump into some code and make this pretty interactive. Awesome. So first question, and feel free to drop in the chat or the Q&A. I'm very curious how folks are defining an agent today. The definition of an agent really seems to vary based on who I'm talking to. And I feel like we're in this phase of AI where there's so many new concepts and we're literally defining them as an industry right now. So this means there might be like a couple different definitions of an agent, but I wanted to align on this before we move forward. Here's how I think of it today. So the concept of an agent has actually existed for a long time before this kind of Gen AI phase that we're in today. It was actually first introduced in the context of reinforcement learning, which is kind of an older mathematical paradigm for AI in a way. But it's actually called an agent in the context of reinforcement learning. And this same definition can really apply in the context of LLMs and Gen AI. But I like to think of an agent as a system that perceives its environment, makes decisions, and it's taking action to achieve some kind of specific goal. So you move towards this more like autonomous AI. It's not just a single call to an LLM anymore. It's more of like maybe a user is interacting with the AI and sharing some kind of specific goal, and then the AI can autonomously take action to help the user meet that goal. So that's how I think about agents. I'd love to hear any other definitions if people want to share it as well. And we will jump to the next slide here. So in terms of agentic AI, I don't feel like it's widespread as a technology yet. This is what I'm seeing. There's kind of this like frontier curve of AI adoption. And starting on like the very right side of the curve here, we have folks who are still like maybe confused. What is AI? Is it useful in my workflow? This is people who are maybe just getting started with AI. I don't feel like this is the norm. I feel like most people have started to really kind of adopt AI into their workflows or are building it themselves. But for the folks who are maybe lagging behind and still trying to figure out what AI is, we can help them out. Then as the next step here, you have AI kind of replacing search results. I personally don't Google anything myself anymore. I just go to ChatGPT. So we see that kind of wide adoption. That's really like the late majority here. Then in terms of AI assistance, we're seeing a lot of adoption of AI assistance within workflows, typically business workflows. We see people using AI to write business emails, things like that, really just making their workflows more efficient. And then there's the gap, and that gap moves us towards what I'm hoping will be that more autonomous agents that we're talking about. So this is where there's a little bit of an adoption gap and a technology gap. I feel like we're really innovating in this space right now. And over the next few years, we will see more adoption of like true autonomous agents. But these are really the true AI agentic workflows, and we see some early adoption of that with the autonomous workflows. And then real autonomous agents will be like self-learning systems that can improve from their interactions with the humans and kind of grow with us over time. So that will be very interesting. Very excited to see what that looks like on the left side of the curve. But to do this, we need to really use tools that are free, widely available, and going to help us build quickly. And so I'll give you a quick overview of what Comet is and what Opik is. Let me jump over to our documentation here, just to give you a view of Opik. So Comet is a AI company. We have been around for a while, and we have some great tools around experiment management. We have some enterprise tools around like model registry, like kind of the old traditional ML ops tools. And then we have also released tools for the Gen AI workflows, and that is completely open source. So everything I'm talking about today, completely free to you. You can get started with it today, totally open source. We created Opik, which is our tool for LLM evaluations as well as tracing. And it is also doing some pretty amazing stuff in terms of agent optimization, which is moving us more towards that like agentic AI and autonomous AI. So that's a quick pitch on Comet. I know there's a lot of tools in this space. Let me jump back here. And okay, to frame the workshop today. So the best way to learn new AI tools is to just build hands-on with it. At least that's what works for me. If I just read about a tool, I'm not going to remember everything. I actually have to like use it hands-on. So I put together a financial advisor multi-agent system, and then I used Opik to do the tracing and evals, and I'll show you guys what it looked like. This was really easy because I was using the Google ADK. I'll jump to the next slide here. This is my tech stack. So I'm using the Google Cloud ADK, that's the agent development kit. They already had an amazing example of a conversational financial assistant. So I didn't have to build it myself. I was just able to use their code, integrate Opik, everything's written in Python, and my coding IDE is Cursor. I'd love to hear from folks if you guys are using Cursor. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you have any best practices for coding with AI? I've been an engineer myself for a long time, but I have embraced vibe coding, but I think there's some certain approaches that help us get value out of that. I will show you my project in Cursor. I'm going to run some code there, and that'll be really interesting to see. Awesome. So let me jump into the actual code here just to set the stage, and then we'll talk through everything that's in Opik and how to actually implement these evals. So you're looking at my Cursor IDE here. This probably looks a little messy. I spend a lot of time in Cursor coding every day. But what I have here is I have that financial assistant agent system. It's a multi-agent system. So you can see here that there are sub-agents as well as a main agent. So the sub-agent, we have one that is, here, I'll expand this so we can see it a little bit better. Oops. Don't want to do that. No. Yeah, okay. That's fine. I'm fighting with the Zoom screen. Okay, so we can see there's a few different agents here. So there is an execution analyst, risk analyst, trading analyst, and then there's one agent that's bringing it all together. The way these multi-agent systems work is you're going to have like multiple agents, each with very specific tasks. And that's actually a brilliant design because that allows you to evaluate each task individually, and then you have one agent to really fine tune if you're getting failures on one of these tasks. So the broad task here is to have a conversation with a user and provide trading advice, financial advice, specific around like different stocks. But because we have multiple agents, like one's doing the risk analysis, the other one is doing the trading analysis. If this system breaks in any way or starts like giving the user bad advice, I know exactly where to go to try to maybe like tweak my prompt, fine tune a model behind that agent, things like that to really improve the system. The code itself is really quite simple, again, using the Google ADK. So I really just have a few lines of code here, but I'll show you how the Opik integrations work. So I'm using the Google ADK, so I'm simply importing that through Python. And then the Opik integration is really just a few lines of Python code. And the way I see people integrating Opik is they might already have a project, they might already have an LLM chatbot or something that they've already written. And I don't want you to have to go through a lot of work to add Opik traces to that. So the way to do it is really just with a few lines of code. You simply import the integration from Opik. We have integrations for most of the common LLM providers, but then we also have like a really handy track decorator if you're like using your own model and need to specify it more directly. So I really just have a few lines of code here where I'm importing Opik. And then you can see I was working with Cursor to really help me understand this code and what it's doing. You can see that on line 56, we are instantiating the Opik tracer. So I'll go to 56. So it's really just these two lines of code here. I'm instantiating this object and it's going to actually start logging all the inputs and outputs as well as allow me to set evals. So that's really all I have to do to set up Opik because we're already using the Google ADK here. Opik knows what the inputs and outputs look like, and they're just going to show up automatically in the UI. So let's hop over there and see what that looks like. Okay, so this is Opik. I'm in my projects page for the financial advisor. And you can see that my user has had, I'm the user in this case, I've had quite a few conversations with this AI, and it's logged each one of them as a thread. I can click into the thread and actually see a complete history of the conversation. So I see all the messages back and forth. Hello, I'm looking for financial advice. You see the output of the UI. I tell it I have a conservative investment strategy, looking for long-term investments. And I tell it which stock I was interested in, and it runs out the four different agents, do their analysis, compile it, and then put it together to give me a final set of advice. Generally, it didn't love the stock that I was asking it about. It didn't feel like it was a conservative investment in terms of risk. So pretty interesting result there. The thing I want to point out here is that this human and AI conversation within this chatbot had 10 different messages back and forth. So this makes evaluating these systems a lot different than just evaluating a single trace to an LM call. There's multiple LM calls here, and I can get a view of each call, but I also want to evaluate things at the thread level. So when I look at let's click into one of these, you can see how complex just one call is. This is just a single call to the financial coordinator, but there's four different agents here. So this is just went through for the financial coordinator. The awesome thing about Opik is all I had to do was like layer in those two lines of code and I get all this information. I can see how much it cost to make this LLM call. I can see a graph of my agentic like multi-agent system, which is a really helpful visualization. And then I can also see like the inputs and outputs of this specific call. And this is just one step in that human AI conversation. And the one step itself has a lot of different steps to it. So that's interesting to point out. What you're looking at here is a trace, and within the trace is multiple spans. So every kind of step within the trace is considered a span, and you do get the inputs and outputs of each one. And if it's an LLM call, you're going to see exactly which LLM was used, cost, things like that. Metadata is all stored. So if you're maybe experimenting with things like temperature, parameters of the LLM, and want to run an experiment there, all that information is tracked to allow you to do that kind of side-by-side comparison. So that's a trace. A thread has multiple traces. Let's jump back to a thread. And I want to talk through the human feedback here. So you can see here that I created a human feedback score. It's just simple, it's yes or no, but this is totally customizable. You can create your own feedback scores. And then you might have a human in the loop here who is maybe reviewing these conversations and maybe looking to flag something. Maybe they're looking for misuse of the system. Maybe they're a financial expert and they're reviewing this trading advice to make sure it's sound. And this allows you to really define any kind of metric and have that kind of human in the loop function within the Opik UI so you can have your subject matter experts interacting here. I'm going to jump back to the slides here. We will jump back into the code and the UI, but I want to cover like a few core things higher level before we dive into actually how to set up that feedback loop.
Just a question in the chat around sort of the concept around threads and spans. The question from Hari is thread in Opik what other evals like Arise would call a span? Like, what's the difference if you can kind of like help people understand the vernacular a little bit better?
That is a great question. Honestly, I feel like there's so many terms in this industry that I get confused myself. But there's a few things to think about here. I'll start at the highest level. The highest level is a thread. So that is a conversational thread. So conversation between a user and the AI, it might have like 10 different messages back and forth. I'm entering that conversation with a goal. I want advice on a certain stock. I back and forth with the AI, provide it information, and finally it gives me that advice. So all of that conversation is a single thread. And that's all tracked here. Within the thread itself are traces, just to make it more confusing. So the first level, the highest level is thread, second level is traces. So the traces themselves is every agent is basically going to have its own trace. So you could think of there's like a financial coordinator and there's also a financial analyst. So there's multiple traces and those are kind of modular, if that makes sense. And then within the trace, you have spans and that's all the steps. So what you're seeing here is the financial coordinator. So you have a trace for the financial coordinator. He is reaching out and getting results from multiple agents. So you have multiple calls within this trace, but each step is really a span. So the hierarchy is thread level conversation. You have traces in that thread. You could have multiple, and you have spans within that trace. Every time I talk through it, I get them messed up. But in terms of thinking about how that aligns with Arise, I'm very familiar with Arise. The traces that we're talking about are not the same as threads. Traces allow you to really like look at that kind of input and output through your entire AI system, which is great. And you're going to have spans the step of the way there. But threads kick it up a level higher where you're actually able to trace a conversation. Because when you look at this, I would think of a trace as like tracing an entire stream of event through the agent architecture end to end. But a conversation is more of that human AI interaction where they're going back and forth, and maybe the AI is collecting details to then know how to traverse this architecture. And that is all at a little bit of a higher level. So the threads allow you to not only collect the conversation together instead of looking at it as kind of like just a few traces that aren't related, you're looking at the traces related within the conversational thread. So as maybe a subject matter expert is reviewing this, they can really look at like what was the user's interaction with this AI from end to end. They're telling it details that are going to go help it navigate that trace, things like that. So you really are able to evaluate this at the kind of perspective of the user, like was the user's goal accomplished from this conversational session? I know it's a bit of a long answer, but those are actually very like detailed technical concepts. I want to make sure we cover them. Good question. Any other questions I should address before we move forward?
I'm just reading through it. Can you zoom in on the diagram on the top right? I think there was an agent graph or something you saw earlier.
Yeah, that graph is fantastic. Let's jump into an example. So This is the agent graph itself. And I have it in my slides because it's not really, there we go. This is actually showing the total agent architecture, and this is generated by the Google ADK and then logged directly to Opik without any additional work. So what you're seeing here is I have the financial coordinator. It basically has 4 different agents with different tasks working for it. And then you can see what those agents are doing. Like the data analyst one will do a Google search. Yeah, I really like the graph because I'm like a visual learner. So like once I see what my architecture looks like, I can start to kind of think like how that relates to the trace and what steps I want to see in the trace. Great question. Anything else before I move on here?
The only one I was going to add, and I think based on the questions, like a lot of the integrations out of the box kind of have this conversational thread aspect that gets automatically logged. But one of the things you can do, and this is a question that's come up where people are building their own AI systems, is you can essentially provide like a thread ID or a session ID, and that can like group up a lot of these conversations together if you've got something a little bit more bespoke or custom. I just thought I'd throw that one out there because I think some people are sort of asking very similar questions in the chat at the moment.
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm really focused on like conversational threads in this context, but there could be a lot of reasons you want to group your traces. And we actually have great flexibility here where you can define what the columns are. So you could have like a tag or you could do like a thread ID is here. So you can really define and group this. The tags are kind of like an open text field. So if there's a way that you want to tag and group traces, that's all possible here. Cool, excellent questions. So why is observability so important? So I think of observability as really that ability to look under the hood of your AI system, be able to track all the inputs and outputs, and also be able to measure issues and debug them. It's really important for production systems because things can go wrong with AI these days. It's kind of a new technology, and we're seeing some kind of fun examples of it going off the rails. This one personally is my favorite example. It is a chatbot use case. GM created a customer service chatbot. I think it was really just supposed to help people answer questions about products and things like that. But somebody was able to negotiate with it very effectively and convince it to sell them a Chevy Tahoe for $1. I think this is a really good example because the chatbot was probably just trying to do what it was instructed to do, which is be helpful and accommodating to the customer. But this is obviously probably not their intent with it. It's probably not a positive revenue move for them. So it's a really good example of the kind of thing that you would want to detect in production. And once these systems are live, you have a lot of users using them and having different kinds of conversations, being able to track those conversations end to end and understand each step that the AI took to get to the answer is going to be really important here. So here's a workflow that I'm proposing, and this is something that I will show you guys how to set up in Opik. Now that we've got like the traces logged, I'm going to show you how to actually set up this kind of feedback loop. Typically what I'm seeing in these conversational AI chatbot use cases is that the human feedback is really important because we have subject matter experts. Like perhaps for the GM example, there might be real customer service agents that are really expert at what they do, and they could maybe look at a conversation and tell you like, oh, the AI shouldn't have said this or it shouldn't have said that. In all these use cases, there are typically human experts that can do very well at reviewing the data, labeling it, maybe identifying areas where the AI is failing so that we can fix it. For the financial advisor, I am not a financial advisor, so I can't really look at the inputs and outputs and tell you if the AI is getting things right. But you could have a financial expert actually look at that and label that for me, and then I could take that person's feedback and integrate it to improve the AI. But to do something like that, I need a little bit of a technology system here is going to facilitate that. So the first thing we need is the ability to collect subject matter expert feedback. We need that kind of human labeling interface. So we need some kind of interface where they can flag issues. And then I can also go into that same interface as the developer and review that feedback myself so I can learn from the subject matter expert. And then as a second step there, I've really walked through how we can kind of slowly label this data as humans. But your question might be, okay, great, but I don't have time to go through like a million conversations and actually label them, and I'm worried I might be missing some critical issues. So the second step there is to really create an LLM that is acting as the human labeler and is mimicking how a subject matter expert would label your data. And to do this, you first need to collect that kind of data, learn from it, and then I propose creating an LLM-as-a-Judge metric that's going to act as kind of like a scoring model here that will essentially label the data in the way that your subject matter expert is, and it's learning from the subject matter expert. And that will all lead to the model and prompt improvements. I want to pause there. Who is familiar with LLM-as-a-Judge? This is a really fun concept. I will talk through it.
I think it's great when you see it actually in use on a practice on one of these evals. It's just a sort of way to walk people through what that might look like. I think
Yeah,
using PII as an example, but like, what happens when something goes wrong? I want to tweak it to a financial use case. So it'd be great to kind of see that come to life.
awesome. Yeah, let's jump into it. I think the best way to look at it is through this graph. So LLM-as-a-Judge, good. I'm glad to see we've got one person familiar. I'm sure there's more. This is a really cool way to create a metric to evaluate your LLMs. It's not always used in the context I'm talking about it. I'm talking about kind of an advanced use case where it's part of a system to help these AI agents learn autonomously from feedback. But LMs as a judge are like used pretty broadly just to generally evaluate your LM. You probably need like a metric to monitor to determine if there's hallucinations, fairness and bias issues, things like that. So what people are doing in industry today is they are using an LLM to judge the output of your original LLM. So you essentially have an LLM judging your LLM. That's why it's called LLM as a judge. The thing that fascinates me about it is it really is just a prompt. And at first, when I thought about that, it felt a little strange to me because I wanted to really think about this as a metric, like a number that I'm monitoring over time for like spikes in hallucination, things like that. But it being a prompt itself feels very interesting in the sense that it becomes incredibly customizable. So I'm going to show you how I customize one for this financial analyst use case, but this is an early one that I created for a recipe generator. And the cool thing that pops out about this is I can show you so many examples of incredibly custom metrics that allow you to monitor for really specific business critical issues in these really niche use cases. You don't get that with out of the box metrics. With out of the box metrics, like you can maybe measure hallucinations. We do have like a general prompt for that. But because this is a prompt, it's really just free text and you can really be super creative here to make it measure the exact issues that you're worried about in your use case. With like pure mathematical heuristic metrics, you don't get that. And I think this gives us a lot of flexibility to actually kind of measure the real things that we're worried about here. So essentially how it works is you can probably see some of the text here. It is just a prompt. It's making a call to OpenAI. You can configure which model you want. I'll show you in the UI with our financial analyst use case. But it's outputting JSON format and it's just outputting an error code 1 or 0. And on top of that, it is also explaining the reason for the answer. So if a trace does get flagged as problematic, not only do you have that metric that you can track over time, but you also have a reason. So if you have to go in there and debug it and want to understand like why the LM as a judge metric said there was an issue here, it's going to give you a little bit of a clue here in the explanation. And setting it up is super easy. We're already logging our traces. So we just configure this. You can do it programmatically or in the UI, which I'll show. And then anytime there's a call to your AI system, it's going to automatically score this and save the metric.
Question I get often, but Hari's actually kind of pointed out. I'm going to put you in the deep end here a little bit clear. Is that
Yes.
you're using an LLM model to judge another LLM model. Like, how do we know this thing's actually right and it's not giving me garbage goop and absolute garbage and taking me down a wrong path?
Okay, fantastic. I also get that question every time, and it is the right question. So whoever asked that, you are 100% thinking about this correct. I'm always happy to see that question. You're right in the sense that because you have an LLM judging the output of your other LLM, you essentially get caught in this interesting situation where you're just introducing additional areas of uncertainty in each step because the output of the original LLM is non-deterministic, it's probabilistic, but this one is also that same way. So for that reason, I wouldn't say that these LLM-as-a-Judge metrics are like 100% mathematically accurate with like 100% confidence level, but they are directionally accurate. For example, if I have a LM as a judge eval for hallucinations, and I'm monitoring that metric over time for a live use case, and suddenly I see like a wild spike in hallucinations, it might not be right to like the decimal point because the LM may be able to kind of have some variability in the output. But it's definitely telling me there's something wrong, and it's definitely worth investigating in terms of debugging and keeping my system healthy. So I really use it as like a directional baseline, and it's very reliable in that sense.
Yeah, I was going to say if you go back to that slide that you had with the diagram for just a second. Keep going. It was the one with the human annotation as well, Claire.
Mm.
Sorry,
There
I'm getting you jumping around here.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you look at this process where you've got the judge there that you mentioned, and that judge is just one layer, one part of this eval process, right? You've still got the human, you've got a lot of that annotation and stuff that comes into the process. So it's a signal as anything. It's not designed to like totally replace that process, which is what you're getting at, and help people understand like, oh, okay, this was working 2 days ago, and now suddenly it's giving me bad results. Doesn't mean that the results are good or bad, but something has changed, right? And I can act on that information.
Exactly.
I think this process is more like kind of seeing it as a system is kind of the way
Absolutely.
to think about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. I wouldn't say they're like 100% mathematically accurate, but we don't need them to be. We need them to be a part of this process and directionally informative. And on top of that, you're getting that customizability because you are crafting your own prompt. So it becomes a way to measure like business issues in these more niche use cases that we actually couldn't measure before.
Another question in the chat, but I'll just kind of go straight up and answer it because I think it could be quite
Yeah.
interesting for others as well. Is that, you've got this LLM as a judge eval, but what happens if I want to do something a lot more complex, like with type checking or with APIs and custom Python stuff? So yeah, our SDK does allow you to essentially write your own evals. It could be a judge or it could be some other thing. It could be like look up against a database I have of like responses and is it in a bad list or good list, like whatever that may be. So that's very possible, but I think if you're just getting started and you want something quick and easy, you just start tracing your stuff. You can see in the UI and you can just quickly put some tests in there and evals, which Claire was just walking us through.
Yeah, we actually have like a whole set of different types of LM evals in two categories. So there's heuristics, and this can be like basic things like let's say you're generating SQL or you're generating JSON. It's very easy to check like, is that JSON? So you can create those kind of heuristic metrics or use out of the box here. And then we also have the LM as a judge, which is the more kind of languagey issues like hallucinations, bias, fairness, that kind of thing. Awesome. Great questions. Um, okay, so this is the workflow I'm going to show how to, I'm going to show us how to set up that workflow on the previous slide. Essentially, this is what we need. We need to evaluate these conversational agents at the session level because there's usually a session goal. So that conversational session, that is what that conversational thread is that contains multiple traces. Each trace has its span. So a lot of complex steps there. But because a user is like going to my chatbot and saying like, "Hey, I want to invest in this stock. Here's like the symbol for it. What do you think?" That user is coming to my application with a goal, and I want to make sure that goal is met. Yes, I can evaluate if the LM returned a response. Was it accurate? How much did it cost to hallucinate? Things like that. But at a bigger picture level, I want that user to walk away feeling like whatever they came to my application for, they got it. And that's a little bit difficult to measure, but I'm going to show you guys how to set up that workflow with the human in the loop to get that going. So let's jump back into Opik and we'll go to the threads. Notice I have like traces, spans, and threads, so I could look at them in different ways. For conversational agents, I love looking at the thread level first because that's just where I get that big picture. And jumping into this thread where I was asking for financial advice about this stock, which apparently is higher risk than I should be comfortable with. Um, the first thing I want to point out here is the feedback scores. So on this thread itself, I can do the human labeling, and this could really be whatever you want. I set it up to be just like flagging for human review. So you could have maybe a subject matter expert look at this and add their own information. And the way we set those up, the human feedback itself, is you can define it. So this is where you define it in the UI. You can create like a new feedback definition. And this is really so flexible. Really, you can name it whatever you want. You can add a description. Maybe you're a developer trying to ask your subject matter experts for help, and you're like, hey, please look at this specific issue. Can you tag this? You define exactly what the categories are, their values. So incredibly customizable. Once you have that created, every thread that is logged, you can go in here and actually add the annotation. And then that will show up for any user in the system. So typically we see like subject matter experts, the human reviewer doing that, and the developer can go in and look at it and really kind of learn from the subject matter expert through that collaboration. The second kind of evaluation is that LLM-as-a-Judge. And so here I made a user frustration one. I wanted to know if the user was like happy or mad. You know, when you're chatting with a chatbot and it's not really answering the questions the way you want it to, or maybe it's like stuck in a loop or trying to route you in the wrong direction. And users can get pretty frustrated. So I wanted to really measure that user frustration, and I wanted that to be quite automatic. So the way you set those up, this is the LLM-as-a-Judge. So this is the user frustration metric that I set up. The first thing to notice is that you can do this at the thread level, at the trace level, or the span level. So you can have these metrics overall at the system goal, and then at each step to get there. And typically my best practice is I will evaluate at every step, big picture and small picture, just so when I'm debugging, I can see high level issues and kind of dig into them. The other thing to notice is sampling rate. You might have a lot of traces coming through here. It might be expensive to do an OpenAI call for each one. So that's also totally configurable. In real world use cases, if I have a lot of users, like maybe 0.9% is good enough. You can choose the model type. I'm very curious how people are approaching this. I personally typically evaluate my model with a different model than the original. So if I'm using like Gemini for my application, I might use like GPT-4 for the LLM-as-a-Judge. The reason I do this is I feel like theoretically it kind of feels like two humans checking each other's work. Like if I have a coding project, I might send it over to Vincent for a second opinion instead of just reviewing it myself. And because he has a different set of experiences, he has a different opinion on it, and that's more valuable. So I'm trying to mimic that kind of human interaction here by choosing two different model types. And then you just set up the prompt itself. And because you're already logging your traces, we know exactly what the schema of the traces. So the schema can be quite complex. This is kind of a simple example, but if you have a ton of different steps or different outputs that you want it to look at through the thread, things like that, because we already defined that data schema by logging a trace, that's all available within Opik, and Opik knows what it looks like. So really easy to set up there. Once I save it, every trace that is logged is going to show up automatically and be scored here. So you can see I'm tagging like happy versus angry users. And that's a real great way to get that live evaluation using LLM-as-a-Judge in a very personalized way.
Do you mind just jumping back into that panel quickly on the judge one?
This one here?
No. When you configure the judge, just a quick one I was gonna point out based on some of the questions I'm seeing. Any one of those will do. So I think one of the questions is around cost. Obviously, like imagine I've got like millions of users and like I'm running this every single time. Like how might you control potentially cost around this?
Yes, so that is a great question. Sorry, I'm like choking my water now. I'm still here. So that is a really good question. The first thing I would say on that is the sampling rate. If you have a lot of traces going through, I don't think you need to evaluate all of them. I think you need to evaluate a representative statistical sample of it so that you can get a sense if there's an issue with your system overall. So that would be the first cost saving there. The other would be the model itself, like maybe an O4 mini is needed, maybe you don't need a reasoning model. Those are the kinds of things that I would kind of pull levers on to optimize the cost there. I know, Vincent, if you have more ideas there too.
Yeah, I think the model choice is a good example there because that's where a lot of the money is obviously controlled by, and obviously you're only seeing the GPT-4o in that screen, but we support a lot of other model providers like OpenRouter and others like that, VLLM. So even if you've got your own custom personal models or local models that you're running, you can trigger those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So let's bring it all together here, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So I've showed how to set up the human in the feedback. You can set your own custom metric for that. I've also showed you how to set up the LLM-as-a-Judge metric. Now, here's where this gets really powerful. We have all the puzzle pieces here to actually create an autonomous, self-learning AI system with a human in the loop still to guide it. So essentially what I would do here is after I build my financial analyst chatbot, I would go make friends with a very good financial analyst and I'd be asking them, hey, can you look at maybe 10% of my data and just tell me, leave some human feedback here and tell me if this financial analyst is going off the rails or giving good financial advice. And so I'd maybe get like a small data set from a subject matter expert who really knows how to review the inputs and outputs of the AI and tell me if it's reasonable or not based on their human expertise. And now that I've got that data set, I want the system to automatically improve from that. So I can take that data to go tune my model, tune my prompt, things like that. That's all really useful, but it was also probably expensive and taking a lot of time because I had to work with another human to do that. And it was probably tedious for them as well. So what we really want to do is we want to scale that process out. So once I get that small data set from the human, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a LLM-as-a-Judge score, and I'm going to create a prompt that basically instructs it to do what the human was doing, as well as provide examples of the human's data to set a standard of how the LM should be evaluating. So what I'll end up with here is human feedback labeling, which can be sparse. I don't need to label every thread, but then I end up with an LLM as a judge that I can automatically use to score things in real time. And the real time is really the benefit there. Like I don't want this thing to spit out some terrible advice and then have to send it over to my friend, ask him to look at it. He gets to it on the weekend, things like that. And then I figure out that my system is performing poorly maybe a week later. Whereas with the human feedback, I'm going to be able to automatically get a score right away. So you're essentially creating an LLM as a judge metric that is learning from the human feedback. You're keeping that human in the loop, but you're also optimizing that human's time. They only need to score a few. You have a fast turnaround, and you're essentially using AI to mimic what they're doing there. So that would be kind of my best practice here. All the puzzle pieces are here. You've got the traces, you've got human feedback as well as LLM as a judge to really put together this workflow here that is going to allow you to more autonomously score and optimize your models. And you could even have like fine-tuning jobs based on this or automatic prompt optimization based on it as well, which is something Vincent spent a lot of time on. That's a really interesting area. I want to pause there. That's really everything that I wanted to walk through today. Vincent, how are we on time? Should we jump to Q&A?
Yeah, I was going to say, so for everyone, 100% you will get the recording later on. I believe Zoom may send you a link, but if not, we will be sharing that through Luma with everyone. So you've got access to that and you can share that amongst your folks as well. I had two burning questions. I think the
Great.
obvious one is like, how much does this thing cost at the end of the day? Not just money, but time and effort. You've kind of touched on this, but just kind of reiterating like the energy versus the reward that you're going to get from setting this up.
Great question. So the project itself, because I was using cursor and vibe coding and I had a jumping off point from Google ADK, I was able to set this up effectively in 2 days. These tools are getting really easy to use. If you know how to use Python, you can get this going very quickly. So in terms of like your time and effort in investing in just setting up a workflow like this, it should be really easy. That's our goal with these kinds of tools. In terms of cost, I think you have to weigh the cost of the business against the cost of making the API calls for LLM as a judge, the cost of employing a human to review your traces, things like that. Once these projects really see the light of day, you have real business value on the line. I think the Chevy Tahoe one is a really good example. So if your chatbot is going to sell cars for $1, like you might want to invest in the API call to run the evaluations. So it really becomes like business specific. But if you're measuring the ROI on your project, I think it's typically easy to justify. Vincent, you're muted.
How many times I've done this? Apologies. Um, Common question, but if you can just throw the docs up again, just like how people can get to that and how people can get to like some of the quick start examples, or even like the example that you shared, if that's available anywhere, maybe we can send that through as a link to everyone,
Yeah.
along with the quick start and also the code samples that you've used particularly for this one. But also at the same time, like how do people get in touch with you? How do people get in touch with comments? Like I'm still stuck. I'm still asking questions like where's the best place for people to kind of reach out to you directly as well if they wanted to?
Great question. I actually had a slide for that way at the end, and you're reminding me. So I'll leave this up for folks. This will take you to our open source repo, completely real open source. All the core features I walked through today are totally available and fully functioning in the open source. So this will take you to the repo directly. There's going to be instructions there on how to get started. You can pip install this. You could also go through Comet Cloud and get like a free tier and host it if you don't want to use it locally. A lot of options for you. So I would recommend just scan this with your phones, go to the repo, leave us a star. We love stars. My job is measured on stars, so do me a favor and leave a few there. I appreciate it. So give the repo a star, and this will really be like your best resource. I do have a link to like the slides as well as my code is open source on my repo. If you want to recreate the financial analyst example, I'll link that. But typically what I recommend doing with those code samples is you guys probably have your own ideas of things you want to build. So copy paste, like take pieces of my code, put it in your repo. It'll get you going really quickly on this stuff. And I want to share that as a resource for you guys. So we'll drop that in the chat.
Couple more questions coming through. Is there any sort of mini video tutorials, hands-on workshops around how to set up and use Opik? They've noticed some other those video tutorials from other companies as
Oh, fantastic. Yes. My colleague Francisco just put together the most amazing resource for you, and I'll drop it in the chat. So we just released Opik University. He's going to walk you through like an intro, the basics, what is Opik, but then he also walks through like all the core functions and or features and how to get started with it. So this is going to really take you through that step-by-step setup, things like that. So I highly recommend this as a example here. It's video. If you learn visually or through audio, it's a really great resource. And then he's also got like all the key highlights here. So this is really gonna like that zero to hero get you started here.
and on that one as well, like we've got some other sessions coming up. I don't know if you want to just throw up Luma,
Yeah.
show what's coming up, some of the topics that we've got whilst I read through the rest of the questions. So Kevin raised a really good one. Metrics obtained by the LLM-as-a-Judge along with the human annotated data set to generate ground truth graphs such as a confusion matrix. I mean, it's very possible using the Python SDK. We are looking at some features around that, internally discussing it, but we might look at throwing together an example based on what you said. It's very, very possible using our SDK.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I like that. I shared a link to our Luma calendar. So we do a mix of virtual events like this one, as well as in-person events. If you're in San Francisco, Vincent has some of the best events in San Francisco, including a boba meetup that's coming up. It's just really fun stuff. So he's local in San Francisco. If you're able to join him there, that would be amazing.
And then the next workshop, I believe, is in a month's time.
Yeah, we're going to do an office hours. So if you're using Comet and you want some time live with me to just ask questions, Comet or Opik, I will be there to help. And then Vincent is going to be leading one on agent optimization. And this is such a fascinating topic. This really gets to like automatically improving your prompts, things like that. It's very kind of advanced, moving us into the next area of AI. It's something he's been working a lot on.
think we're almost at time, but I might just quickly help you answer one or more of these questions. You mentioned that we can use the SME feedback to improve the LLMs to judge performance, and that we can do that automatically via prompt engineering or fine tuning. Can you just like get into that process a little bit more, at least show people? So, like a lot of the questions I'm seeing is like LLM as a judge is great, the human annotation is great, but like
Yeah.
there's a little disconnect in around sort of like how that works as a process. And I know you've touched on this, but it'd be great if you can just kind of like bring that home for people.
I love that. Yeah, I think that kind of cues up our next session well, because that really gets into like agent optimization. So as I mentioned, we kind of have all the puzzle pieces here. We've got the feedback loop. We've got the LM as a judge. The LM as a judge is based on the feedback. So we are able to automatically like mimic the human feedback. That's fantastic. But then I think you guys' questions are correct. It's like, what's the next step there? Like, how do I actually improve the model, change the right parameters, or maybe optimize a better prompt? And that's where we get into something I don't have time to cover today, but Vincent built some of this, so he's your right person. So join our next session on that. Agent optimizer. So this is going to mathematically run a optimization model algorithm that is going to generate new and improved prompts based on the metrics that you set up. So really kind of advanced stuff here. I think it's just the beginning of this industry figuring out how to do this, but this is exactly the right path to go down here. I'll drop a link to this. It's something you can start using today, and also something I'm sure we'll be investing in and adding to more as well.
Any other burning questions from anyone? Otherwise, we might just wrap it up there. Cool. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Claire, for giving an hour of your time to share how you've been building with Opik. And stay tuned, everyone. And as mentioned, we'll share the link, the docs, the slides, the code, the video, everything over the next few days. Take care, everyone.